Hey everybody, welcome to Screen Realm, it's Guillermo here. You're about to watch a video chat that I was lucky enough to line up with Brandon Cronenberg, the filmmaker making his third feature following 2012's Antiviral and 2020's Possessor. His third film is Infinity Pool, a dark sci-fi horror thriller starring Mia Goth, Alexander Skarsgard, and Cleopatra Coleman. The film follows James and Em, who are attempting to enjoy a vacation at an isolated beachside resort, but guided by the seductive and mysterious Gabby, they venture outside the resort, where things take a dark turn. A tragic accident leaves them facing a zero-tolerance policy for the crime. You'll either be executed, or if you're rich enough to afford it, you can watch yourself die instead. I talked to Brandon about the inspiration for this dark tale, having to edit the film to avoid an NC-17 rating in the US. Thankfully, Australian audiences are receiving the uncut version in cinemas, drawing from personal aspects when crafting the lead character of James, and the benefit of getting an all-in performance from the talented Alexander Skarsgard. Hope you enjoyed the chat. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all things Screen Realm, and watch out for the Australian theatrical release of Infinity Pool, being released by Maslow Entertainment in cinemas May 11th. Brandon Cronenberg, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, thanks so much.
I saw the film just last night, and I'm still kind of like reeling from it. I like to say this to all filmmakers that I meet. Firstly, just congratulations on getting a film together in the first place. That alone is a fact that I always think deserves applause. It's no easy task.
that is true. Thank you for that.
So tell me, what was the inspiration for Infinity Pool? I heard you say that you originally had this in mind as a short story.
Yeah, there was a short story I was trying to write and never completed back in 2014, maybe 2013. And it was just the first execution scene from the film. So it was a story about a man watching a double of himself being executed, and the double is an exact likeness and has all his memories and thinks that it's guilty of his crimes. And so it was really just about that, about identity and punishment and that kind of thing, guilt. So then it expanded into this feature, and that's where the resort came in, and the other characters and the sort of plot built out from that scene, basically.
I love the resort aspect, because it got me thinking about, you know, holidays that I've had. The film touches on kind of a disturbing thing that some of us do when we go to certain countries. We travel around kind of troubled or maybe poverty-stricken neighborhoods, and then we end up in a little bubble of indulgence, while just around us maybe chaos is supreme.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I once in my life went to an all-inclusive resort about 20 years ago, and that was I definitely drew from that experience. It was in the Dominican Republic, and it was very surreal because they would bus you in from the airport in the middle of the night. You would see literally none of the country at all, and you would get dropped into this resort compound, which, as with the film, was surrounded by razor wire fence. You weren't allowed to leave it. There was a kind of fake town in this resort compound where you could buy things. You didn't see anything of the country at all. You were completely removed. And then at the end of the week, they bus you back during the day, and you can see that there's this like fairly intense poverty just outside the resort. And that contrast is, of course, horrific, but also, again, completely surreal, because it's like you've never been there. You've been on, you know, embassy grounds for some kind of, you know, international tourist country, or like some kind of alternate reality bubble has sort of popped up like a fungus in this country, and that's what you've experienced. And so that seemed like a good environment for a story about people who are operating outside of conventional consequences.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you get home and people say, "How was that country?" And you're like, "It's beautiful. It's actually quite nice. The drinks are really good prices, and everyone seems really quite happy." You've never actually seen the country.
One of my favorite stories was from a journalist I was talking to when I was doing interviews for Canadian Press, a Quebecois journalist who said he's talked to someone who went on vacation and didn't even know what country they went to. He just asked where they went, and they said, "I went south." But that seems insane, but at the same time, it's not at all, kind of, because again, if you're just on a resort compound, if you're not in any way engaging with the country, you know, you're not really there. You are just going south.
Yeah, that's right. So you don't have to say exactly what countries if you don't want to, but you mentioned the Dominican Republic, but were there other countries that served as kind of influence, or other areas of the world that served as an influence for this seaside country of Litolka?
Well, it was always written as an unreal place. It wasn't meant to be reality, but it was kind of a bit of a strange dream of an Eastern Bloc state. That was the basis of it. And we shot in Hungary and Croatia, and the real world communist histories of those countries ended up really affecting the film. Again, it was always a little bit in the script. There was a whiff of it. It was a bit of a texture, but as we shot there, we're shooting in, power stations built during the communist era. I mean, the police cars are these Volgas, which were cars that were driven by communist politicians. The resort, although it has been heavily renovated, was built during communism and has this sort of like brutalist structure to it. This communist era brutalist resort. And we never made it to it, unfortunately, but there's a sister resort up the coast that looks the same, except has fallen into disrepair. It is like this kind of incredible Ballardian ruin. And so, it was through process, I guess, inspired by those real places, but it was only written barely to resemble them.
Well, that's one great thing about sci-fi and horror is you can explore real world themes and elements quite easily if you just create the narrative around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you sort of skew the reality. You look at it through a particular lens, and it just counteracts people's habituation to the real world just by making it a little weird, just by making it a little bit alien. People sort of see the world with fresh eyes, and I think those genres really lend themselves to satire for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's quite well known now, especially with some of the marketing, that the film was kind of edited. It was more extreme. It had an NC-17 in the US.
The version that would have received an NC-17 in the States, and the version that you guys are getting, is a totally uncut version of the film. So there's nothing lost from it. The thing is that the United States has a very particular censorship problem with film, which is that if you get an NC-17, you can't even market the film. It's like cigarettes over there. So you can't market the film. Almost no theaters will play the film if it's given an NC-17 rating. You just can't have a proper release there. So my distributor in the US, Neon, are very good about that sort of thing. And so basically, contractually, I'm allowed to have final cut of my film, but I owe, if my cut of the film gets higher than an R, I owe also an R cut, because there has to have that. we have to have that in order to release the film properly in the US. Very surprisingly, in Canada also, the censored version of the film came out theatrically. That almost never happens in Canada because our rating system is much more lenient. But for very weird bureaucratic reasons, it had to be censored in theaters in Canada originally. So but that's great that you guys are getting the uncensored.
Yeah, that is cool. And as a creator, does it really sit badly with you, or is it just kind of part of the business?
You have to be so pragmatic with film, because there's so much money at stake. There's so many practical limitations. So of course nobody wants to censor their work. Of course nobody wants to have anyone telling them what to do. But you go into it knowing that that's the case. That's just the art form. If you want to make films beyond a certain budget, you have to kind of play that game. And so it's you become pragmatic about those things.
Yeah. I've heard you say in some interviews that the elements of the character of James, played by Alexander Skarsgard, are based on some of your own periods, such as writer's block and having a bit of self-doubt as a creator. There's a scene where James is read a scathing critical review, which I found quite an amusing scene while he's walking down the road. Is that something that you drew from yourself, reading some reviews, say, in the past?
Yeah, it's funny. Writers are the ones who tend to find that scene funny. I've heard that from writers a fair bit, I guess, that they sympathize with that kind of scene. Absolutely. I mean, James isn't, strictly speaking, a stand-in for me in the film. He's not really my double, as it were, but there are aspects of the character that are definitely a kind of self-mockery. I'm making fun of myself with that character. And there was an 8-year gap between my first and second films because I just could not get a second film made, for all the usual indie film problems. We couldn't get financing, we couldn't get cast. And so there are, some pretty dark times in that 8 years, a lot of self-doubt and insecurity. And so the failed writer character who's having his bad reviews read to him seemed like a good way to make fun of myself.
I'm interested in your approach when filming some of the film's more wildly chaotic scenes with characters running around and going nuts. That home invasion scene, for example, was there a focus on strict choreography, or did you have a more improvisational take on things so that you can just capture the actors doing their thing?
It depended on the moment. I mean, with the fight, when you're fighting in film, there's you have to be more strict about the choreography. Same with the guns. I mean, there's certain aspects of it where you have to be very specific about for safety reasons what people are doing. But that whole sequence was shot in one day. Which was an unfortunate reality of being an indie film. It's not a tiny film, but it was trying to do a lot for the budget, and so we ended up having to shoot that entire home invasion sequence, including outside the mansion, in one day, which meant necessarily it was a little bit more improvisational. I mean, you block with the actors, they fall into a rhythm. You set up the camera. We had 2, 3, occasionally 4 cameras running because that was the only way that we were ever going to be able to get the footage that we needed in the time. So yeah, it was more it was a bit more chaotic and improvisational than I would have liked, but that was just the nature of the shoot.
It seemed to work for some of those scenes. As a viewer watching this film, you didn't know what someone was going to do, especially Skarsgard, who just kind of, especially when he's kind of high. There's a particular sequence in, I think, the home invasion where he's just absolutely losing it. I'm just interested, was that choreographed? Did he plan that, or did he just kind of spontaneously start riffing?
Which part of it? When he's breaking in?
When he's basically, he becomes like an animal and he starts growling. No, I don't mean later when there's an animal aspect to him. I mean in the house when they're surrounding a certain individual.
Oh yeah, during that fight. So it was in the script that he has this sort of like animal quality, but he really explored that scene. Like, we shot that quite a bit. It was exhausting for him, but he really was, amazing what he gave us, and the fact that he held up for that whole thing, doing such physical acting. He gave us this incredible palette to work with, and so it was lots of takes, lots of exploring. He was trying a lot of different things, gave us all this incredible work, which we then sort of shaped in the edit, but we could have gone into all these different directions with it. And that's very much to his credit. I love and very much appreciate actors like that who are able to give you this wide range of material that you can then play with, and who are willing to push themselves to those extremes. So yes, a lot of that was him just exploring and going as far as he could go.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, and I'm really, really looking forward to what you've got coming up next.
Thanks so much. Great speaking to you.
Thanks, man.